What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. Season 2 of House of the Dragon is right around the corner, and I thought it'd be a good time to give folks a little refresher by counting down my top 10 favorite scenes from Season 1, which I thought was one of the best fantasy adaptations that I've seen in years. And also, I owe this story a huge debt of gratitude because I had a couple bad days recently where if I were to describe the things that were coming out of my lungs, you would have thought I'd been poisoned as part of some elaborate palace intrigue or assassination plot in King's Landing, but 2 days ago, my doctor put me on steroids, and boom, I'm ready to start making videos again. So hooray for performance-enhancing drugs. But while I was in my kind of deranged, feverish state, like sweating profusely and just feeling like total shit, I rewatched Season 1 for a third time, and I listened to the audiobook for Fire and Blood. And obviously, if you're listening to an audiobook, you're not going to internalize everything to the same degree as if you were reading the actual book. But if it's your second or third time, well then, yeah, the audiobook can be a ton of fun, especially when you're in no condition to do much of anything. And speaking of which, I know HBO is working on yet another adaptation of Fire and Blood where they're going to try and capture the period dealing with Aegon's conquest. And while I would prefer for Ryan Condal to handle all their adaptations, if successful, if they do Aegon's conquest, that could be a couple seasons, but that would lead you straight into the period dealing with Maegor the Cruel, which would give you 1 or 2 more seasons. Basically, you could do like 30 seasons of TV out of this book. And also, George R.R. Martin's working on a part 2 for Fire and Blood, which is basically the second half of the Targaryen dynasty. So anyway, George R.R. Martin's going to be keeping HBO busy for a very, very long time. So I'm feeling well and thoroughly prepared to do regular commentary on this show for the rest of the summer. And during what is turning out to be a historically weak summer movie season, at least in terms of box office, and I think House of the Dragon has a good chance of being the best pop culture event of the entire season. And come to think of it, there are almost no shows in history where I've watched them 3 times. I saw The Sopranos twice, which admittedly is a much longer show, but looking back on 2022, a year where there were a staggering 600 shows released, I think House of the Dragon just blew away the competition, and it could very easily do so again starting on June 17th. But before we get to my list, let's discuss the challenge of adapting a great book successfully. We see so many shows and so many movies just making a mess of things, and George R.R. Martin himself had a few words to share on the subject where he said, "Everywhere you look, there are more screenwriters and producers eager to take great stories and make them their own. It does not seem to matter whether the source material is written by Stan Lee, Charles Dickens, Ian Fleming, Roald Dahl, Ursula K. Le Guin, J.R.R. Tolkien, Mark Twain, Raymond Chandler, Jane Austen, or, well, anyone. No matter how major a writer it is, no matter how great the book, there always seems to be someone on hand who thinks he can do it better, eager to take the story and quote-unquote improve on it. The book is the book, the film is the film, they will tell you, as if they were saying something profound. Then they make the story their own. They never make it better, though. 999 times out of 1,000, they make it worse. And the poster child for that would be this show's distinguished competition, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. I had this great moment recently where I was reuniting with my old high school roommate. I hadn't seen him in years. He moved away from New York like 5 years ago, but he came up here with his kids, and his son, who's like 12, is getting into reading fantasy books and science fiction books, and we're talking about Dune and all these different things, and we started talking about Lord of the Rings, and then we started talking about the Silmarillion, and suddenly he goes, "But that show, The Rings of Power, it isn't very good." And I was like, oh my God, like even a 12-year-old child can recognize that show fucking sucks. So we exchanged a bunch of high fives. But yeah, anyway, let's not get distracted, talk about The Rings of Power. Let's stay focused on the good show, House of the Dragon. But I co-sign all of George R. R. Martin's comments. My attitude is when you're adapting a work of fiction to the screen, the old cliche used to be great books can make kind of subpar movies, but trashy best-selling books can make great movies. Like take a page turner like Jaws and turn it into a hit. Take a page turner like The Exorcist and turn it into a hit. But if you take great literature, sometimes it can be challenging to adapt, like William Faulkner or Ernest Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald. But because George R. R. Martin comes from the world of television, I feel like in the back of his mind, he always knew, I'm going to write my books in a way where they're going to be tailor-made or very, very easy to adapt to television, and the rest is history. But what's interesting and very challenging for House of the Dragon adapting Fire and Blood is that they did have to flesh out the text because it was written in very broad strokes like a history instead of a traditional novel. And they did make some changes and they did make some omissions. And once you get started down that road, it can be a very slippery slope. And they had so much rope to hang themselves with. And I'm sure behind the scenes, you've got, between executives or well-intentioned actors, basically, I'm sure you've got like like a full army of people offering notes and suggestions, all of which would kind of take the show and pull it away from the spirit of the text. But I think more often than not, like the final product, the cast and crew, they just nailed it. And I think the best example of this show making an improvement upon the original text would be the character of King Viserys as played by Paddy Considine. I thought he completely stole the season. There were many great actors and many great characters, but his character as written and portrayed on the show, it's almost a complete departure from the character as written in the text, but goddamn, they just took it and they made it soar. But more on that as we get into my official top 10 list. But of course, because I'm a huge fan of the book, I naturally have my little nitpicky grievances and my complaints, like the Iron Throne. It still looks like shit. It should look like it's built on a pile or a mountain of melted swords from Aegon's conquest. And as George R.R. Martin stated, I said repeatedly, the Iron Throne is huge. It towers over the room like a great beast, and it's ugly. It's asymmetric. It's put together by blacksmiths, not by craftsmen and experts in furniture manufacturing. You have to walk the iron steps, and when a king sits on it, he's like 10 feet above everyone else. He's in this raised position, looking down on everyone. But who knows, maybe HBO will finally get that right if they ever follow through on doing that spin-off show on Aegon the Conqueror. But I think in general, showrunner Ryan Condal was born for this job, and we'll see how he does in season 2 as the sole showrunner on the show after the departure of Miguel Sapochnik. And I suggest you go online and read about that behind-the-scenes drama between Sapochnik and HBO. It was mean, it was ugly, it was a total shit show. It was basically on the level of a George R.R. Martin novel where they had to bring in like third-party arbitrators to kind of help settle the dispute. But long story short, Miguel left the show, he left his agency, and now the show is in Ryan Condal's hands, and we'll see where he takes it. But with that lengthy intro out of the way, let's dive into my official top 10 list. So starting with number 10, we have a scene from episode 5 where Alicent declared war with a dress. And I just love that scene because, as the narrator for Fire and Blood frequently states, the seeds for a bloody conflict are always planted well in advance, and it's hard to know what was the moment where the dance of the dragons, or the dying of the dragons, as they say in the book, was inevitable. Like, was it the point where King Jaehaerys needed a successor, and they were debating whether it was going to be Viserys or Rhaenys, both of whom were grandchildren of the old king, as they described him? Or was it the moment when Viserys declared Rhaenyra to be his successor? Like, who knows what was the official moment where the war became inevitable? But one of the main theories in the book is that there were so many legitimate contenders and there were so many dragons, and the Targaryens had reached such a state of immense strength, like not since the time of old Valyria had there been so many powerful people with Valyrian blood with dragons at their fingertips, where, you know, inevitably somebody was going to start killing somebody at some point. But what's cool about the scene when Alicent walks into the wedding, she's just learned that Rhaenyra drank that tea to help get rid of any unwanted consequences from her night on the town when she was fooling around with Daemon in some pleasure house. And as she's striding into the wedding and everybody's gossiping about her, I love how the show cuts away to Larys Strong and Sir Harwin Strong, a.k.a. Breakbones, and they start gossiping about what that dress signifies for the High Towers.
The beacon on the High Tower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war? Green.
So for me, in this show, the first real blow, I guess maybe not the first real blow, but this is the first moment where the greens and the blacks start to take sides, even if they are not fully aware of it at that time. But for my number 9, we have a scene from episode 7 where Aemond loses an eye, but gains a dragon. And this scene just made me howl with laughter because as vicious and nasty as the adult characters can be, I mean, we expect Daemon Targaryen to do ugly things. We expect Otto Hightower to be, power mad and crazed with ambition and that sort of thing. But it's hilarious seeing how from a very early age these characters are just ready to scrap and throw down and pull out knives defending their family name and what they regard as theirs. And it's difficult for anybody to fully lay claim to Vhagar because Vhagar's been around for a very long time. He was ridden by Visenya during Aegon's conquest back in the day. I mean, he's old as hell. But Lady Laena Velaryon, who was married to Daemon, she was riding Vhagar, but at the time of her death, suddenly the dragon's up for grabs, and Aemond decides to lay claim to him, or at least tries to successfully. after being ridiculed by all of his siblings for not being a dragon rider yet. And obviously, a lot of these Valarians and Targaryens, like they'll put an egg in their cradle, you get a hatchling when you're born, and you kind of grow up with your dragon, and you form a bond. And then as a dragon gains more and more riders over time, each bond is more difficult to establish. Sometimes the dragon will just either burn you or eat you or maul you or whatever the case might be. But in that, Aemon has basically pulled Vhagar away from Team Black over to Team Green. Lucerys pulls a blade, slashes the eye, which obviously leads to the big climax in episode 10 when Aemon decides to get a little bit of revenge. But, in the aftermath, all the mothers are screaming at each other and stabbing each other. It's just a complete and total family meltdown. But as Aemon says at that time, it was all worth it. I lost an eye, but I gained a dragon. And Otto Hightower at the end, he's like, the price that he paid, it was worth 1,000 times. I mean, Vhagar is hell on wheels, but more on Vhagar as we get into season 2. But next up from my number 8, we have a scene from episode 10 where Corlys Velaryon, aka the Sea Snake, finally joins forces with Team Black.
You have the full support of our fleet and house, Your Grace.
And he had many incredible scenes throughout the season, and I just feel like he's one of the actors on the show that really brings that Shakespearean gravitas to the role. Like there's some actors we can tell, they've done a lot of TV and they act like TV actors, and there's some actors we can tell like they walk onto the stage and like the air expands around them when they're speaking to the back row, and like he could play King Lear, he could play Macbeth, he can project, he just speaks so powerfully. I just love the way the character has been portrayed. But whether or not he and Rhaenys would join Team Black wasn't totally a foregone conclusion due to how they created the masquerade of the death of Laenor when Rhaenyra and Daemon wanted to get together a few episodes earlier. But when he finally announces that he and his fleet of ships will be joining Team Black, I was like, it's so satisfying. And even though I knew it was coming, and it reminded me a little bit of at the end of episode 2, when the Sea Snake seduces Daemon into joining him in his war down in the Stepstones. And so, for people who don't know or don't remember, the Sea Snake has the largest fleet of anybody in the Seven Kingdoms. He had these famous 9 voyages as a young man where he would sail farther and farther away, and each time he came back, he would bring all these rare spices and silks that you couldn't get anywhere in the region. And like the wealth of his household and his family would double with each voyage. So for a time, the Velaryons became the most powerful family in all the Seven Kingdoms. So more to come with the Sea Snake in season 2. And for my number 7, we're going with a scene from episode 1 where Daemon fights dirty, but I guess he pretty much fights dirty in every single scene where he draws his blade. But we see this incredible tournament unfolding as Viserys is awaiting the birth of a child that he's hoping will be a son, not realizing that it will be a son, but it's going to cause the death of his wife as well as the death of the child. But as she's going through this horrible, agonizing miscarriage, we're seeing this incredibly bloody tournament unfold. And at this point, the Seven Kingdoms have been in a state of peace for so long. You can tell there's a lot of pent-up aggression where the knights are increasingly eager to prove themselves and show what they can do. And goddamn, when Daemon gets out there, he's taking his lance, putting it down in front of the horse. I mean, just cheating outright in order to dismount his opponent. And I love seeing that first fight between him and Sir Criston Cole. Sir Criston Cole, just absolute hell on wheels. My only knock against this scene is that Daemon's jousting with the helmet that makes no sense. If you're jousting, you want just a thin little visor where you can see with your eyes, because otherwise you're going to catch a lance right in the face, even if you're using a wooden lance that explodes. Yeah, you want full protection, but obviously they also want everybody to know that that's Matt Smith out there. But I thought his Targaryen armor looked cool. It just wasn't very practical for jousting in any case. That was a great way to get the season up and running. But pushing on to my number 6, we have scenes from both episode 2 and episode 10 when Otto Hightower comes to Dragonstone. And I like these scenes for 2 reasons. First and foremost, Rhys Ifans, if I'm saying this last name correctly. So some of these names from the UK, we Americans, we just cannot pronounce them. I look up how to pronounce them on Google, and I'm always a little bit dubious. Like, am I saying it like an American? Am I saying it the way you're supposed to? But anyway, Rhys Ifans, a.k.a. Otto Hightower, I love the way he portrays the character. Nobody's ever said, "Your Grace," with more variety. He says it like 100 different ways over the course of the season, where you never quite know like what does he mean or what is he suggesting. But he's so clever at suggesting different emotions or different intentions depending upon how he delivers that line. But when it comes to Dragonstone, he just lets Daemon have it.
And leave Dragonstone by order of His Grace King Viserys.
Where is the king? I don't see him.
His Grace would never lower himself to entertain such a mummer's farce.
Daemon and Otto have always hated each other, and it's just a chance for Otto to really put him in his place. But in addition to this incredible dramatic tension between these characters, you also get a chance to see Dragonstone in all of its glory. And I feel like in the show Game of Thrones, they never really did justice to Dragonstone as like an example of Targaryen architecture and Targaryen culture. It's the closest thing that we'll ever see to what old Valyria might have resembled. And obviously we've got the model that King Viserys is working on, where you get to see old Valyria in all of its glory. But old Valyria was a really dark, savage place because you had many, many families that were much more powerful than the Targaryens and the Velaryons, all competing for power with all these horrible temples, like practicing what they called blood magic. I mean, it was a place of evil and corruption. And I feel like when we see Dragonstone with that really cool bridge and that really interesting architecture in the background, it just gives you a taste of a world that we will never see. And it's a world that's barely hinted at in George R.R. Martin's books, which is cool because in our imagination, Valyria will always be an absolutely fascinating place. So I love the dramatic power of those confrontations on that bridge. And hopefully we'll see a hell of a lot more of Dragonstone in the seasons to come. But for my number 5, we're going with the scene from episode 8, where Aemon Targaryen tells us he doesn't give a shit about tourneys.
I don't give a shit about tourneys.
And of all the different interpretations of the characters in this show, Aemon Targaryen has to be one of my favorite because he's the only person that seems like he can be a legitimate threat to or great competition for Daemon. Like, Daemon's hell on wheels, and he's terrifying, and he's really intimidating, he's really corrupt and power mad and that sort of thing. But that's not as interesting unless he has a worthy rival who's good with a sword, but also flies friggin' Vhagar, the largest dragon that's alive in the world. But there's something about this scene where we haven't seen Aemon since he got his eye slash as a little boy. This is our reintroduction to the character after a time jump. And Jace and Luke are walking down into the training yard, and he turns around and just says, "Nephews, are you here to train?" And the way he says it, you're like, oh my God, like this guy every day wakes up and trains for hours. And after he beats the hell out of Kristen Cole tells him, you'll be winning tourneys in in no time. And he just says, I don't give a shit about tourneys. What Aemon Targaryen really looks forward to is war and conquest and killing. He is a true Targaryen. He's got the blood of the dragon in him. And with only a few simple lines and a few simple gestures in that scene, he tells us all we need to know about the very savage and very dangerous Aemon Targaryen. And my number 4 comes from episode 4 with a scene which I'm describing as incest is best, or at least it is as far as the Targaryens are concerned, because we have a scene where Daemon and Rhaenyra decide to have a night on the town in King's Landing, and very rarely does this show slow it down enough where you really get to kind of explore the world and kind of let it breathe, or where we get to basically breathe in the atmosphere and the details of Flea Bottom or the Street of Silk and that sort of thing. There's so much story and so much plot that this show has to get to, but every once in a while you gotta let us live in the atmosphere of this environment. And King's Landing really comes to life, especially when they're seeing plays all about the basically like the problems related to succession and who should succeed King Viserys. And I love how at one point Rhaenyra is I think, what does she say? Oh, slander, boo. Anyway, it's hilarious. But we also see a bit of a sexual awakening for Rhaenyra, because in this world, obviously, the men are always bragging about how they go to whorehouses throughout their entire childhood before they finally settle down. Whereas with women, they have to maintain their maidenhood and they have to maintain their virtue. But I like seeing how Rhaenyra, she's in this environment where people are doing all kinds of things all around her. And initially, she's kind of intimidated, and then she's excited, and then she's interested and curious. And clearly she is game, and Daemon's he's initially trying to corrupt her, but then you realize, oh, well, his level of enthusiasm might be here, but maybe her enthusiasm is up here, and then he can't perform sexually because she's so excited, and perhaps he probably prefers to be the pursuer rather than the pursued. In any event, he can't get it up. He leaves. He storms off in a huff. She heads back to the Red Keep and ends up losing her maidenhead or maidenhood to Kristen Cole. And I thought that was actually a very touching, kind of semi-tragic scene, because there's been that great sexual tension between them for a long time at that point, which ultimately leads to him having his heart broken the following episode. But the reality is the Targaryens, they're a very strange family. They've been trying to keep that blood pure for a long time. And in the latter part of their overall reign, like, there's so much inbreeding going on where they start to realize, like, anytime there's a new Targaryen born, you basically can flip a coin, and it's a 50-50 chance that they'll just be stark raving nuts. And it's because they're all screwing their nieces and uncles and sisters and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, like, some of the most loving, touching, like unions throughout all of George R.R. Martin's text come between characters like King Jaehaerys and his sister. Like, they're married for like 50, 60 years, and the only people they ever know are each other. It takes the reader into really unusual territory in terms of how George R.R. Martin depicts these relationships, because there is love there and there is lust there, but there are also horrible consequences. But obviously the alliance between Rhaenyra and Daemon, that's at the core of Team Black, and I am Team Black. Just a full warning for all you people out there who are Team Green. If you're Team Green, I do not understand you, but this is the beginning of Daemon and Rhaenyra planting the seeds for their eventual alliance. And they do end up having a few Targaryen kids between them who look quite different from the kids she has with Breakbones. But next up, for my number 3, we have the scene where Vhagar eats Arax or Arax. I never quite know the correct pronunciation for some of these dragons. They all have awesome fucking names. It's a consistent source of pleasure just seeing how creative George R.R. Martin is with the names of the characters as well as the names of the dragons. But the whole season was leading up to this moment where somebody would do something so horrible that you would not be able to talk things down or walk things back, where blood would be spilt to such a degree that there would be real and dire consequences. And it still blows my mind that this season worked, because structurally so much could go wrong. There were so many time jumps, and we see so many characters at different points in their lives, often played by different actors. Like, after the embarrassment of the final season of Game of Thrones, I'm sure HBO was like, whatever you do with the first season of House of the Dragon, just make it a hit and make sure that it's easily digestible. But there's nothing less easily digestible than their approach to season 1 of House of the Dragon. But they rolled the dice to take a big creative swing, and they made it work. But the whole season is just building, and this inevitable tension and all this family strife, and occasionally things will kind of die down, but it just keeps building. And finally, Lucerys and Aemon, they confront each other down at Storm's End. And for a book that's written more like a history book, that's one of the few scenes where George R.R. Martin writes out the whole scene in full, where we have Boris Baratheon basically being courted by Team Black and Team Green. And Boris Baratheon is like, all right, well, I've got 4 daughters, like, pick one, and I'll be on your side. And Aemon's more than happy to play that game, but Luke is already betrothed to his first cousin, and so he cannot make any commitment on the front.
Go home, pup, and tell your mother that the Lord of Storm's End is not some dog that she can whistle up at need to set against her foes.
But if you read that scene, it's almost taken word for word verbatim from the book and put right into the show, and they just nailed it. It was beautiful stuff. But the big difference is, in the book, because the book is all written like looking back on first-hand accounts at that time, where nobody made a first-hand account of the battle in the sky. It's all first-hand accounts of people at Storm's End looking up at the clouds and just seeing fireballs and that sort of thing. So they're just kind of imagining what might have been, whereas in the show we get to get right up in there. But what I loved about the scene is how neither Luke nor Aemon seem to be in full control of their dragons. And if you remember, it's Luke's dragon who attacks first. Like, Luke's just trying to get away, and suddenly his dragon just spins back and blasts Vhagar with fire. And Luke's dragon is like, it's a teeny tiny, very maneuverable, very quick little dragon, but due to all the rain and the storm, it's not quite as maneuverable as it ordinarily would be. But as you'll see in the Dance of the Dragons, dragons do not care about size. A hatchling will try to take on Balerion the Black Dread. They do not care if the other dragon is larger. They just love to fight. And even dragons that are on the same side, if they're like, if there are big scraps going on, they might get confused about which side they're supposed to be on. It's very dangerous to let dragons fight dragons, because usually what ends up happening is they just rip each other to pieces and fall to their deaths. But in the case of Vhagar's just so goddamn big. One big bite, and Arix and Luke are both, well, dead ski. But let's push on to number 2, where we have a tie between scenes from both episode 3 as well as episode 8. But in both cases, we have Daemon being Daemon. And I'm very biased because Daemon is my favorite character in the Dance of the Dragons, and I think Matt Smith has just been absolutely nailing the character with each and every little syllable that he says on this show. And it's a tough thing to portray a villain in a charismatic way because so few filmmakers and so few television writers are willing to allow their villains to go like all in and do horrible things. Like in the final episode of the season, at one point, Daemon is choking Rhaenyra, telling her, like, dreams didn't make us kings, dragons did. And there's no public outcry saying, oh, like, why is Daemon being such a horrible son of a bitch? People still love Daemon, and if you think that's bad, like, Daemon's going to do many evil, diabolical things over the course of this war, but he's also one of those guys who recognizes, like, if you're fighting other Targaryens who also have dragons, you got to go, balls deep. You got to be willing. You have to be willing to do the most savage shit imaginable because Team Green, they're going to be playing dirty too. Otto Hightower, he's not going to be pulling any punches. But sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. I got so excited talking about Daemon and Matt Smith's portrayal of the character, I forgot that I needed to actually talk about the 2 scenes that are my number 2. And this would be, or they would be, the 2 beheadings or the 2 decapitations of his enemies. We see the first one in episode 3, where Daemon finally takes out the crab feeder. We've been seeing over the whole episode how the crab feeder's forces, they just keep retreating into caves, making it impossible for Daemon to finally get a final victory. And he's just being bled dry of men and resources and food. And he's about to be humiliated by Viserys, who's now sending reinforcements to kind of help save the day. Like, he's so mad that he's about to not be able to win the war on his own that he smashes the face of the messenger. But they cook up this plan where he will basically sacrifice himself or risk himself by walking out alone, draw out the crab feeder's forces, dodge a few arrows, fight a few people, but eventually gets to hunt down the crab feeder. And at the end of the episode, we see him dragging out like half the body of the crab feeder, and then he brings the weapon to his brother in the following episode. But the killing of the crab feeder is tied with the killing of Vaemond Velaryon, the brother of Corlys Velaryon, when basically Vaemond decides to call out the children of Rhaenyra as bastards in front of the whole court, and rather than allow him to have his tongue removed as ordered by Viserys, Daemon just chops off like part of his head and says,
He can keep his tongue.
and when he does it, what's so cool about the scene is how Aemond, who's watching for a moment, is like, oh my God, like that's who I want to be. You can see Aemond's eyes like light up with excitement, just seeing what a true Targaryen is and how they behave and that sort of thing. And I like the character of Vaemond Velaryon, but he was trying to disinherit his nephews. But once again, you can see things from his point of view because under normal circumstances, when a show or a movie decides to do a lot of race swapping, it can lead you into some tricky terrain. But it worked out beautifully in the case of House of the Dragon because if you have black people playing the Velaryons, and then you have the children of Rhaenyra who are not black at all, like nowhere near black in appearance. They look about as black as I do. Well, then it makes the fact that they have strong blood or the blood of breakbones in them that much more apparent. And a lot of our people are always just like just look at them. Like you can just tell they are not who everybody is pretending that they are. Like only Viserys and Rhaenyra are willing to cling to that lie, but I just thought that scene was handled so beautifully, and it's yet another example of the escalating tensions between Team Black and Team Green, and it leads to my number 1, which takes place earlier in the same episode, in the same scene, when King Viserys sits the Iron Throne one final time. But the doors open up, and you see Paddy Considine limping into frame, and he's wearing a mask to cover up the fact that one of his eyes is completely decayed and rotted away. And you can tell he's just in agony, just walking through. And he walks up to Otto and just says,
I will sit the throne today. Your Grace.
Well, I think even at that time, Otto's like, Your Grace. He's always saying, Your Grace, but he says it once again. But I almost start bawling every time I see that scene. The music swells, and they just give such a heroic grandeur to that character in that moment. And that's a heroic grandeur that is totally, completely lacking from the book. At no point in the entire book is King Viserys depicted as someone who is wise or courageous or willing to put up with agony and pain in order to do the right thing. And I think it's the emotional peak of the entire season. I think it's the emotional peak of any character all season long. Like, Daemon might be my favorite character, but in terms of just pure dramatic power, it's just incredible. And there's even a little bit of humor there when he sits on the Iron Throne, and then when he finally, makes his rulings, like, we have settled, like, the issue of succession again. And you can tell, like, he's starting to get a little frustrated that while he's been, spaced out on Milk of the Poppy, people have obviously been kind of, manipulating things behind the scenes in a way that are not necessarily to his liking. But it was just an incredible scene. It was an incredible season, an incredible show. And I think if they can maintain that level of quality throughout the 8 episodes of season 2, oh my God, we're going to be in for such a treat because there's so much good stuff for them to adapt. And what's cool now is that they no longer have to do any time jumps of any kind. Because in season 1, they had to tackle so many years of the story where you had to have so many time jumps just to kind of give us all the context leading up to the Dance of the Dragons. But the actual dance is only 2 years, so I hope you like the cast as they stand, because that is the cast. Sorry, I'm coughing like King Viserys. I got to beat this cold. But what was I saying? Oh, but anyway, the Dance of the Dragons, it's 2 years, so the cast we have now is the cast that we will enjoy and be going along for the ride with for the rest of this show. I keep hearing that they want to do 4 full seasons. That seems like the perfect number of seasons. But if they wish to, they could just keep going afterwards, because as you're reading the Dance of the Dragons, it's hard to know, like, what is the final battle of the Dance of the Dragons? Like, what's the natural stopping point? Because even after a lot of the, I won't say what they are, but like a lot of the major consequences or like major events have taken place to kind of settle it, there's like all these battles that are like part of the aftermath and all these consequences, because the story just keeps going. But we'll see where they decide to end things several years from now, when and if they get to season 4. But I suspect HBO will renew this show for season 3 a week or 2 after this show premieres this summer, because it's a dry spell right now when it comes to scripted entertainment. We need a win. We need a cool show. We need a cool movie. And I think, like I said before, House of the Dragon season 2 is going to dominate summer 2024, and I don't think anything else is going to come close. In any case, it's time to wrap this video up. Thanks for sticking with me as I ranted and raved about my favorite moments from season 1. Looking forward to reviewing season 2 in about, like a week and 6 days. It's right over the horizon, and I'm intensely fired up. And I'll definitely be reviewing each and every single episode as they drop on those Sundays throughout the rest of the summer. So thank you for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, liking the video, sharing the video, all that wonderful, beautiful stuff. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.